They told us we had 24 hours to decide whether our marriage was a mistake before we were allowed to read the letters that could change everything. The attorney folded his hands across the polished oak conference table, his calm expression making the words feel even heavier. Across from me, Ryan Carter stared at the gold wedding band on his finger as if he had never seen it before. The room overlooked the Las Vegas Strip, where bright neon lights had looked magical the night before and strangely unforgiving now that the morning sun had erased every illusion. My name is Ethan Brooks, and until yesterday, Ryan was simply my best friend. My straight best friend. The guy who had been beside me through every milestone since we were 12 years old. The one who taught me how to throw a baseball even though I never got very good at it. The one who drove 3 hours in a snowstorm just to help me move into my first apartment. The one who never forgot my birthday, never missed a phone call when life fell apart, and somehow never realized that every important memory I owned had him standing somewhere in the background. None of that was supposed to end with a legal marriage certificate signed sometime after midnight in Las Vegas. There has to be a way to cancel this immediately, Ryan finally said, rubbing the back of his neck with the same nervous habit I had watched for nearly 2 decades. The attorney offered a sympathetic smile. Normally, yes, but your situation is a little unusual. I blinked. Unusual. He reached into a slim leather folder and carefully placed 2 sealed envelopes on the table between us. They looked old, the cream-colored paper slightly faded around the edges, each one bearing our names in handwriting I recognized instantly. Mine. Ryan's. My heartbeat stumbled. I knew those envelopes. I had almost forgotten they existed. Almost. Before any paperwork can move forward, the attorney continued. These letters must be opened together. They were filed under a mutual agreement through a memory capsule program offered by this hotel 6 years ago. According to the documents you both signed, neither letter can legally be released unless both of you are present. Ryan frowned. 6 years. He looked at me, confused. What letters? I couldn't answer. My mouth had gone completely dry because I remembered exactly when we had written them. It had been another trip to Vegas after college graduation. Back when everything still felt simple. Back before careers, before distance, before pretending became easier than telling the truth. I had written mine in less than 10 minutes. Every word had terrified me. I never expected to see it again. I certainly never imagined it would reappear sitting between my accidental husband and me. Ryan reached toward his envelope before stopping just inches away. His easy confidence, the trait that had carried him through every emergency as a firefighter, was gone. For the first time since I had known him, he looked genuinely afraid of reading something written in his own handwriting. Outside, the city buzzed with another ordinary morning. Inside that quiet office, it felt as though time itself had decided to wait with us, holding its breath until one of us found the courage to break the seal. Ryan slowly pulled his hand back from the envelope, as though touching it might unlock a version of himself he no longer recognized. Neither of us spoke. The silence settled between us with a strange weight until the attorney quietly cleared his throat. Perhaps it would help if you remembered why you wrote them. His words became the spark that pulled me backward through time. 72 hours earlier, the trip had been nothing more than a long, overdue vacation. Ryan had finally taken a full week off from the fire department after working nearly nonstop for months, and I had just finished illustrating my biggest publishing project. Neither of us wanted anything complicated. We wanted cheap buffet breakfasts, ridiculous tourist attractions, and one weekend where nobody expected us to solve anyone else's problems. That was what we always did together. We escaped. We had been escaping together since middle school. Back then, Ryan had been the fearless kid who climbed every tree in the neighborhood, while I stayed below holding a first aid kit because someone had to think ahead. He used to joke that I was born 40 years old. I told him he had never mentally aged past 15. Somehow those differences had fit together perfectly for nearly 17 years. Friends came and went. Relationships started and ended. Cities changed. Jobs changed. We never did. The first night in Las Vegas followed the exact pattern everyone expects. We wandered beneath glowing hotel signs, laughed at street performers, argued over whether pineapple belonged on pizza, and somehow spent 20 minutes watching the dancing fountains without saying much at all. Ryan always had a way of making silence feel comfortable instead of awkward. That was one of the reasons I had fallen in love with him years ago. He had never known. I intended to keep it that way forever. He deserved a friendship untouched by expectations I had no right to place on him. "You are smiling," Ryan suddenly said as we stood outside one of the casinos that evening. I looked at him, confused. "What? You have been smiling for the last 5 minutes." I shrugged. "I guess I am just happy." He bumped my shoulder with his. "Good. You deserve that." It was such a simple sentence. Ryan said things like that all the time without realizing they stayed with me for weeks afterward. We wandered inside, drawn less by gambling than by the air conditioning and the music pouring across the crowded lobby. Someone convinced us to join a trivia game. We lost spectacularly. A retired couple from Arizona laughed so hard that they bought us dessert afterward, insisting we were the most entertaining team they had ever seen. Ryan accepted with his usual charm, while I apologized 3 separate times. "See," he teased once they left. "People like you more than you think." "They like you," I corrected. "I just happened to be standing nearby." He laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. "Ethan, if you ever believed half the good things people say about you, your life would be a lot easier." I wanted to tell him that the only opinion I truly cared about had always been his. Instead, I smiled, looked toward the sea of lights stretching across the strip, and quietly wondered how long someone could carry a secret before it simply became part of who they were. The night continued with the effortless rhythm that had always defined us. We wandered from one attraction to another without following a schedule, stopping whenever something caught Ryan's attention. He insisted we pose with a group of street performers dressed like old movie stars. He challenged me to a basketball shooting game that I predictably lost by an embarrassing margin. The prize was a giant stuffed coyote with crooked ears, and Ryan proudly carried it over his shoulder through the casino as though he had just won an Olympic medal. Complete strangers congratulated him. He accepted every compliment with a grin while pretending the toy had always been part of our travel plans. Watching him laugh was strangely comforting. It reminded me why I had never regretted keeping my feelings to myself. Loving Ryan quietly was still better than risking the friendship that had shaped almost my entire life. As evenings settled over the city, music spilled from every direction. The sidewalks became more crowded, filled with tourists celebrating birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, and victories both real and imagined. Everywhere we looked, someone seemed to be starting a new chapter. Ryan leaned against the railing overlooking the glowing lights below and stretched his arms above his head. "Promise me something," he said. "What?" "No matter where life takes us, we keep doing this. Maybe not every year, but every few years. Just disappear for a weekend and remind ourselves that work is not our whole personality." I smiled. "That sounds reasonable." He extended his little finger toward me with exaggerated seriousness. "I am asking for an official promise." Laughing, I hooked my finger around his. "Officially promised." "Good," he said. "I would hate to lose my favorite travel partner." The words settled somewhere deep inside my chest. Favorite travel partner. Not soulmate. Not the person he loved. Just the friend who always showed up. I told myself that was enough. It had always been enough. Later that night, we wandered into a small piano lounge tucked between 2 larger casinos. It was quieter there, the music soft enough that conversations floated easily across the room. An older pianist accepted requests written on folded napkins, filling the space with familiar songs that everyone seemed to know. Ryan recognized one from high school and laughed. "Do you remember prom?" I nearly groaned. "Please do not remind me. You accidentally stepped on your date's shoes 3 times. Twice. Definitely 3. You counted. I have always paid attention." The answer came so naturally that neither of us seemed to notice how personal it sounded. We ordered sparkling cider instead of anything stronger because we had already agreed we wanted to explore the city early the next morning. We toasted to surviving adulthood, to overdue vacations, and to 17 years of impossible friendship. At the neighboring table, a cheerful retired couple overheard us talking and smiled. 17 years? The woman asked warmly. That is longer than some marriages these days. Ryan chuckled. We are basically family at this point. The woman exchanged an amused glance with her husband before saying, sometimes the best love stories begin with people who think they are only family. Ryan laughed politely and thanked her for the conversation, but I looked away toward the glowing stage because I suddenly found it difficult to breathe. I convinced myself she was simply making harmless conversation. Neither of us could have known that within a few hours, fate would quietly place us in front of a decision that neither friendship nor common sense had prepared us to face. When we finally stepped back outside, the desert air carried just enough warmth to soften the edge of the late evening. Ryan checked the time on his phone and laughed. It is barely 11. We are officially too responsible for Las Vegas. I raised an eyebrow. Responsible? You know what I mean. Everyone else is just getting started. As if the city itself had been waiting to prove his point, a young couple rushed past us wearing matching wedding veils from a novelty shop while their friends cheered behind them. A man dressed as Elvis waved enthusiastically from the entrance of a small wedding chapel across the street. 2 for 1 ceremony. Tonight, he called with theatrical enthusiasm. Best decision you will ever make. Ryan grinned and nudged my shoulder. Imagine waking up married to your best friend because you made one terrible decision. I laughed harder than I expected. That would never happen. Never say never. Ryan, we cannot even agree on where to order breakfast. Exactly. Healthy marriages require compromise. We continued walking, joking about imaginary honeymoon destinations and arguing over who would forget to pay the electric bill. The conversation was ridiculous, harmless, the kind that only existed because neither of us believed it could ever become real. A few blocks later, we discovered a small festival taking over an outdoor plaza. Local musicians filled the air with upbeat songs while food trucks lined the sidewalks. A charity booth challenged visitors to complete light-hearted games in exchange for donations benefiting children's literacy programs. Ryan immediately volunteered us for nearly every activity. We lost a ring toss, won matching souvenir bracelets during a trivia contest, and somehow found ourselves writing short messages for a community time capsule that would remain sealed for years. Write something your future self should remember, the volunteer instructed with a smile. Ryan scribbled quickly before folding his card. I stared at the blank paper much longer. Eventually, I wrote only one sentence. Do not let fear decide your life. I slipped it into the collection box before I could change my mind. That looked serious, Ryan observed. Mine says future me should finally learn how to cook something besides chili. I laughed. That sounds more like you. Midnight approached without either of us noticing. Music drifted through the plaza as strangers danced beneath strings of glowing lights. Ryan held up his phone to capture the moment. One picture, he said. Proof we actually took a vacation. We stood shoulder to shoulder, smiling into the camera while the city sparkled behind us. Looking back now, I realized that photograph captured the final moment when our lives still belonged to the version of ourselves we thought we understood. A cheerful event. Coordinator stepped onto a small stage and announced the grand finale of the evening. Every remaining visitor received a raffle ticket simply for participating in the charity events. Ryan glanced at ours and shrugged. We never win anything. A minute later, the loudspeaker echoed across the plaza. Ticket number 4372. Congratulations. Ryan looked down at the numbers in his hand, then back toward the stage with complete disbelief. That is us. We exchanged confused smiles and walked forward, never imagining that accepting one innocent prize would quietly place us on a path neither of us could have predicted. The prize turned out to be far less extravagant than the flashing lights and enthusiastic applause had suggested. The event coordinator handed Ryan an elegant envelope tied with a silver ribbon and congratulated us on winning a complimentary experience sponsored by one of the city's historic boutique hotels. It is one of our most popular packages, she explained. A luxury suite for one night, breakfast included, plus access to our memory vault experience. Ryan looked at me with amused confusion. Memory vault? She smiled. It is a tradition we have offered for years. Guests create letters to their future selves or to someone important in their lives. Some choose to read them together years later. Others never come back at all. Every story is different. I felt an unexpected shiver, although I could not explain why. Ryan accepted the envelope with his usual easy smile. Well, free is definitely within our vacation budget. We followed the directions to the small hotel tucked several blocks away from the busiest part of the strip. Unlike the towering resorts surrounding it, the building felt timeless, with warm lighting, polished wood floors, and framed photographs showing decades of visitors celebrating weddings, anniversaries, and reunions. The atmosphere was quiet enough that it almost seemed untouched by the constant noise outside. While checking us in, the receptionist searched our reservation before looking up with an apologetic expression. There is one small complication. Ryan and I exchanged a glance. The promotional reservation only includes one suite. We are completely booked tonight because of a convention. Ryan shrugged almost immediately. That is fine. We have shared hotel rooms before. The receptionist smiled with visible relief. Thank you for understanding. The suite overlooked the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. There were comfortable chairs beside the glass, a small dining table, and a welcome basket filled with snacks from local businesses. Ryan tossed the oversized stuffed coyote into one corner of the room and laughed. He finally has a place to rest after carrying us all evening. I could not help laughing with him. Everything still felt ordinary. We ordered sandwiches from room service, watched an old comedy on television, and spent nearly an hour arguing over which childhood stories were being remembered correctly. Ryan insisted he had rescued me from falling into a creek when we were 13. I reminded him that the water had barely reached my ankles. Details, he replied confidently. History remembers heroes. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, someone knocked gently on our door. A hotel employee delivered a small wooden box engraved with the hotel's emblem. Inside were 2 blank stationery sets, matching fountain pens, and a printed invitation. Ryan picked it up and read aloud. Write 1 letter tonight. Seal it. Leave it with us before checkout. Return whenever life surprises you. Read it only with the person beside you this evening. He smiled. That is actually kind of nice. I nodded, pretending the words had not landed somewhere much deeper than they should have. Ryan sat at the desk without hesitation, uncapped his pen, and began writing almost immediately. I watched him for a moment before moving to the chair beside the window. The lights of Las Vegas stretched endlessly into the distance, while the blank page rested in front of me. I realized I had spent years carefully choosing every word I never said to Ryan. Now, for the first time, I was being asked to write them somewhere they could not be interrupted, erased, or taken back. My hand hovered above the paper as I quietly wondered whether honesty was safer when you believed nobody would ever read it. Ryan finished first. He folded his letter with surprising care, slid it into the cream-colored envelope, and sealed it without a second glance. Done, he announced, stretching comfortably in his chair. Either future me is going to think I was incredibly wise, or he is going to laugh at how dramatic I sounded. I smiled without looking up. Which one do you think is more likely? Definitely the second. He walked over to the window beside me and leaned against the glass. Below us, the city shimmered beneath thousands of lights that refused to sleep. You are still writing? He asked softly. Almost. It was only half true. My pen had barely moved across the page because every honest sentence felt dangerous. I could have written about my career, my family, or the places I hoped to visit. Instead, every thought circled back to the same person standing only a few feet away. Ryan looked out over the skyline with the relaxed confidence that had always made difficult moments seem manageable. You know, he said after a long silence, if someone had told 12-year-old me that we would still be taking road trips together at 28, I probably would not have believed them. I looked at him. Why not? He smiled. Because life usually pulls people in different directions. It tried. Yeah. He nodded thoughtfully. It did. There was something unexpectedly sincere in his voice that made my heart tighten. He glanced toward the stuffed coyote sitting on the couch and laughed. We have collected some strange memories. Mostly because of you. You never complain. Someone has to supervise your bad ideas. He laughed again before patting my shoulder. Finish your masterpiece. I am going to grab some ice from the hallway. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, the room became painfully quiet. I looked back at the unfinished letter. The blank space waiting beneath my last sentence suddenly felt impossible to ignore. Slowly, I began writing the words I had spent years refusing to say out loud. Dear future me, if you are reading this, I hope you finally found the courage that I never seemed to have tonight. Ryan has been my best friend for almost my entire life, and somewhere along the way I stopped wishing for someone like him because I realized there could never be another person exactly like him. I know he has always believed his future would include a wife, children, and the kind of ordinary happiness he deserves. I have never wanted to stand in the way of that dream. So if these feelings are still only mine when this letter is opened, promise me that you will smile anyway. Promise me that loving someone quietly will never become something you regret. I stopped writing and closed my eyes for a moment. The words felt lighter once they existed somewhere outside my own thoughts. They were no longer a secret carried only inside my heart. They belonged to the page now. I folded the letter carefully, sealed the envelope, and wrote my name across the front with slightly trembling hands. Just as I finished, Ryan returned carrying a small bucket of ice and 2 bottles of sparkling water. He noticed the envelope resting beside me and smiled warmly. Looks like we both survived the assignment. I smiled back, hiding the nervousness behind the simplest answer I could manage. Yeah, I said quietly. I think we did. The next morning arrived with gentle sunlight spilling across the suite, making the events of the previous night feel strangely distant. Ryan was already awake, standing by the coffee maker in an old college sweatshirt he still insisted on wearing whenever we traveled together. "Good morning," he said with an easy smile. "I found coffee before I found civilization, so today is already a success." I laughed, grateful that everything still felt normal. Whatever emotions I had poured into that sealed envelope now belonged to the hotel vault, safely hidden from both of us. We drank coffee by the window while watching the city slowly come alive. There was no awkwardness, no dramatic shift, only the familiar comfort that had always existed between us. After breakfast, we carried the wooden box containing our letters down to the front desk. The receptionist welcomed us back with a warm smile and carefully accepted the envelopes. "These will remain protected until you both choose to return together," she explained. "Some guests come back in 1 year. Others wait decades. A few never return at all." Ryan glanced at me. "Maybe we should make it interesting." "What do you mean?" "Let us promise we will come back 6 years from now. Same weekend. Same hotel." I smiled without hesitation. "Deal." The receptionist slid a small document toward us. "If you would like to reserve that commitment, both of you simply need to sign here." Ryan picked up the pen first. Easy enough. I signed beneath his name without reading every line, trusting that it was nothing more than confirmation for the memory program. Ryan did the same, joking that legal documents should always come with larger print. The receptionist stamped the paper, slipped it into a folder, and wished us a wonderful future together. At the time, her choice of words barely registered. We spent the rest of the afternoon exploring museums, visiting bookstores, and walking through quiet neighborhoods away from the crowded strip. It became one of my favorite days we had ever shared because nothing extraordinary happened. Ryan found a used copy of a childhood adventure novel we both loved and insisted on buying it for me. I discovered a small art gallery where he patiently waited while I admired every painting. We ate oversized slices of cheesecake at a neighborhood diner and argued about which state made the best barbecue. Every ordinary moment felt priceless simply because we experienced it together. That evening, as our trip came to an end, Ryan looked over at me while we waited to board our flight home. "Same trip in 6 years?" he asked. "Absolutely." He held out his fist. I bumped it with mine, sealing the promise in the same effortless way we always had. Neither of us realized that one overlooked signature from that quiet hotel lobby would remain hidden beneath years of ordinary life, waiting patiently until fate brought us back to Las Vegas. Now, sitting across from each other inside the attorney's office 6 years later, I finally understood why the receptionist had smiled the way she did. The folder on the table was not only connected to our letters, it also contained the document neither of us had truly read, the one that had quietly transformed a sentimental promise into something the law recognized far more seriously than either of us had ever imagined. The attorney quietly opened the folder and turned it toward us. There, beneath our signatures from 6 years earlier, was the explanation we had somehow overlooked. The Memory Vault experience had been part of a promotional event celebrating the hotel's anniversary. Couples, close friends, or travel partners who chose the package could voluntarily enter a symbolic commitment ceremony that included legal marriage registration for anyone who completed the required documentation. The receptionist had mentioned the commitment. She had handed us the forms. She had even congratulated us before we left. We had simply assumed every document belonged to the letter program because we had been laughing, talking, and paying almost no attention to the fine print. Ryan slowly covered his face with both hands before letting out a long breath that sounded halfway between disbelief and laughter. "Please tell me this is the strangest practical joke in Nevada." The attorney smiled apologetically. "I am afraid everything was filed correctly. Your marriage has existed for 6 years. The words settled over the room like falling snow. 6 years. While we had gone back to our ordinary lives, celebrated birthdays, changed jobs, attended family holidays, and continued taking occasional road trips together, the law had quietly considered us spouses the entire time. Ryan looked over at me with wide eyes. We have been accidentally married longer than some people intentionally stay married. I could not help laughing despite the surreal situation. When you put it that way, it sounds even stranger. The attorney slid the two sealed envelopes closer. According to the agreement you signed, these letters must be read before any request for dissolution can proceed. Afterward, the decision is entirely yours. He stood and walked toward the window, giving us privacy without actually leaving the room. Ryan rested both elbows on the table, staring at his envelope. "Do you remember what you wrote?" he asked quietly. I swallowed. "Some of it. Do you think it is embarrassing?" "Probably." He smiled nervously. "Mine probably is too." Neither of us reached for the envelopes immediately. Instead, we sat there surrounded by years of memories that suddenly felt different. Every vacation, every holiday dinner our families had shared, every moving day, every birthday, every late-night phone call after one of us had a difficult week. Without realizing it, we had spent 6 years honoring promises most married couples struggled to keep. We had shown up for each other without obligation, without expectation, simply because neither of us ever questioned whether the other would be there. Ryan finally broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder why we never drifted apart?" I looked at him carefully. "I used to think we were just lucky." He nodded slowly. "Maybe we were." Outside the office windows, the Las Vegas skyline shimmered beneath the afternoon sun, looking nothing like the city we had wandered through 6 years earlier. Back then it had been a place full of bright lights and harmless adventures. Now it had become the place where the truth had quietly waited for us all along. Ryan reached toward his envelope again, this time wrapping his fingers around it instead of pulling away. He looked directly into my eyes, his expression calm but uncertain. "Whatever is inside these letters," he said softly. "Thank you for being my best friend before any of this happened." My throat tightened as I nodded. "Always." Then, together, we carefully broke the seals that had remained untouched for 6 long years. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter I had written 6 years earlier. The paper had yellowed just enough to remind me how much time had passed, but every word felt as vivid as the night I had written it. I read silently while Ryan did the same across the table. By the second paragraph, my vision blurred. I had forgotten how honest I had allowed myself to be. I had written about baseball games, late-night phone calls, impossible road trips, and the quiet realization that somewhere along the way my favorite person had become the one I could never imagine replacing. I had also written that if Ryan was happy with someone else by the time this letter was opened, then I hoped I would have learned to celebrate that happiness without regret. The final sentence stopped me completely. It read, "If we are still together as friends, then I have already lived a life luckier than most people ever will." I slowly lowered the page and looked up. Ryan had not moved. His eyes remained fixed on his own letter, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw tears quietly gathering at the corners of his eyes. He took a slow breath before reading one sentence aloud. "I do not know what my future looks like, but if Ethan is still standing beside me when I read this, then I hope I never take that gift for granted." He stopped, swallowing hard before continuing. "I always tell everyone that I am going to marry some amazing woman one day. Maybe that is true. Maybe it is not. What I do know is that every time something wonderful happens, the first person I want to tell is Ethan. Every time something difficult happens, he is the first person I call. If there is a word for that kind of love, maybe future me will finally be brave enough to understand it." The room fell completely silent. Neither of us spoke because there was nothing left to hide behind. The answers we had spent years searching for had been waiting inside 2 envelopes written by younger versions of ourselves who had somehow understood the truth before we did. Ryan folded his letter carefully and looked at me with the same warm smile I had known since we were children, but this time there was something new inside it. Recognition, relief, hope. "I spent 6 years thinking I knew exactly who I was," he said quietly. "Then I read a letter written by a younger version of myself who somehow knew my heart better than I did." I laughed through my own tears. I spent 6 years convincing myself that silence was the safest choice. Ryan reached across the table and gently took my hand. It was the simplest gesture in the world, but somehow it changed everything. The first time we signed those papers, he said, smiling softly, it happened because we were not paying attention. If we stay married now, I want it to be because we finally are. I smiled back, feeling years of fear quietly disappear. The attorney returned to the table, glanced at the unsigned dissolution papers, and waited. Ryan looked at me one last time. I nodded before either of us spoke a single word. Together, we slid the papers back across the table untouched. A few months later, we returned to the same hotel, stood beneath the same warm lights, and exchanged promises we understood completely this time. There were no surprises, no confusion, and no accidents. Only two best friends who had spent years proving their love through ordinary moments before finally finding the courage to give that love its true name.